Welcome everybody for the first Food of Thought in 2022 on a very important topic that I hope we can continue, that we can deepen our conversation about today and hopefully continue this conversation. So with us today, we have Jonas, Aurelia and Siniat, who've worked the last half year to develop a report that is the basis of our next resource guide also on inclusive journalism. They've investigated the concept of inclusive journalism as well as in the context generally, as well as in the context of our work as Free Press Unlimited. Some of you have even been interviewed by them, so most of you will have heard about this ongoing process. This report will be turned into a resource guide on the KNQ website, together with that will be put together between Knowledge and Quality and the Inclusion and Equity Task Force. But of course, this is more than just a resource for our work. This is also about the paradigm with which we do our work. So yeah, with that, I'd like to hand over this to Jonas, Aurelia, and Siniat to present their work as students of University College Maastricht, with whom we've had the honor to work, who we were able to give this assignment as a societal stakeholder, yeah, for their coursework. So yeah, thank you, and take it away.
Yes, thank you, Tim, for the introduction. Well, yeah, welcome also from our side, from Aurelia, Junaid, and my side. We have prepared a little slideshow, which I am going to share. Okay, so welcome to this session today, the Food for Thought on inclusive journalism, where we are going to first talk to you a bit about what we did in this last semester and what we have produced. And then we're also very interested in discussing and hearing your opinion. And it's really about exchanging thoughts and sort of, seeing this as a starting point, because as Tim already indicated, there's a follow-up work to be done. And we first are gonna do a small introduction and invite you to a brainstorm. Then we're gonna give a brief presentation about inclusive journalism, how we have experienced and researched it in the past semester. And then we're going to show you a bit of the resource guide, or the final product that we have created and how it is structured. And then we have a few follow-up activities, which mainly involve discussions and questions from our side, but also if you have any questions for us, we're happy to talk about that. So first a little, let's go back. So, okay, first a little introduction from our side. So we are Jonas, Junaid, and Aurelia, and I am a third-year student at University College Maastricht, and I'm from Germany, and I focus mostly on social sciences, so politics and development and globalization studies, and I think it's very interesting how people find themselves in global contexts or in local contexts connected to global environments and the interactions between these two levels. And therefore journalism, which is of course a part of how people make sense of their world, it's really interesting and also fit sort of the academic curriculum that I follow here at UCM. And I would like to pass it on to Junaid.
Hi, I'm Sinead, and I also focus on the social sciences, but I focus more on international relations, law, and public health. And I also deal with concepts such as gender equality, and so this researching on inclusivity and diversity was really interesting and important to me as well. So I'll pass it on to Aurelia.
Hello everyone, I am Aurelia. I'm also a third-year student at UCM. I mainly focus on political sciences and philosophies, and I explore themes such as development, globalization, inequality, but also distributive justice and more the philosophical aspect of this.
So as you can already tell, we are in parts doing same things here at university, and we are also doing different things. And you might wonder what this bachelor program actually is, because it sounds a bit chaotic. So just to give you a quick overview of our university, it's called University College Maastricht. And our bachelor's program is called Liberal Arts and Sciences, where we basically construct our own curriculum and we choose courses from different concentrations. So, okay, it's lagging a bit. Yeah, this is a picture of our beautiful building here in Maastricht. It's an old monastery, so it's quite beautiful. And we follow the process of problem-based learning, which means that we don't have lecture-based education, but it's up to the students to define problems and to come up with solutions to these problems. So it's a very active approach. And I think we also sort of took that a bit into our work of this internship. And yeah, we'll talk to you about that later.
So here, this is a bit the overview of how we approached the work. So we started in September last year. And at first we conducted literature review, trying to understand what was the problem, what was the issue regarding inclusivity and journalism, how the two concepts are linked, and how to make journalism more inclusive. So we formulated a research question of what are the best practices of inclusive journalism. After this first part of really literature review, we then decided to conduct in-depth semi-structured interviews with 6 participants. I think some of them are here, so they know. And we hoped to match what we had from the literature review with the interviews and eventually even going deeper in some themes. We then analyzed the interviews through thematic analysis, and we matched all the results basically in a text that is then the report that we had. And in order to have an even broader reflection of what we came up with, we decided to conduct and distribute a survey among the FPU staff. I hope all of you did it. And to be sure that our results were matched with the FPU staff, but also at the same time to assess the knowledge of the FPU members on the topic. And the results were kind of interesting because it seemed that people or had a very deep knowledge, and so it matched with our research, or some were a bit confused maybe on some terms and concepts related to inclusivity and journalism.
So now to kind of break down a little more, I'll try to understand the knowledge level. We're going to put you into breakout rooms and prompt you to discuss what inclusive journalism means to you. And you'll be in these breakout rooms for a couple minutes and come back and have one person share kind of a summary of what you guys came up with and thought about inclusive journalism.
Okay, welcome back. We hope you had a nice, quick discussion. Maybe some of you would like to share some themes of discussion that you have talked about in your breakout rooms, or some things that came up.
I would speak for my group, if you don't mind. I said I wouldn't present, but maybe I will give it a go since I hear silence. So in group 1, we discussed initially about representation. We discussed about representation of at the level of ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation. Then we discussed about the role of social media as essentially as a driver for more inclusive journalism, and how that changed how journalism is done and its impact at the level of inclusiveness. And we discussed how, for example, social media can be an instrument to go outside mainstream, and therefore enlarging the culture that journalism represents. Then we also discussed staying on the culture. We also made a distinction between journalism as representation at the level of content, and the fact that for journalism to be inclusive at the level of content, must also be inclusive at the level of how it is organized and how media organizations are inclusive themselves. And then I think we concluded our section discussing intersectionality. But perhaps, Amy, you introduced that that concept at the end, so perhaps you can rephrase that. Otherwise, this was more or less the discussion we had.
Yes, in our team, we talked very similar to what Davide was sharing. We also focused on accessibility, who has access to what information, and by which means, that it's not only what stories you tell and who is telling them, but how. That the importance of having diversity in the newsrooms or media organizations, on how they're, a bit what David was saying with their representation, a bit as well like them, the kind of categories came up so, like very clearly, like at the beginning, like the different categories that we typically think of when we think about inclusiveness. And yeah, I think that's it.
Well, I think we can discuss more later, but for now, we also prepared a little presentation of the content of our project. So I would suggest that we start this now, and then afterwards, we always have more time to discuss. So let's pull up the presentation again, and yeah, Aurelia.
Yes, so we wanted you a bit to brainstorm before maybe giving you what we found on inclusive journalism. And yeah, thank you for participating in that. And yeah, maybe we can introduce you very, very briefly on our findings, on some of our findings. So as I mentioned very briefly before, our research question, so kind of the pillar of our research around which the whole research really evolved, is what are theoretical and practical principles that inclusive journalism should follow. And yeah, now we want to present you some key findings. So with inclusive journalism, we intend and encompasses media discourses, editorial policies, and practices that include a diversity of and diverse voices. And we really want to emphasize how this is applicable at all levels of media production, and that all these levels must be involved in terms of inclusivity. So at the level of the content, at the level of the newsroom and delivery, so also the audience. And different actors must be involved in order to achieve this inclusivity, in order to make journalism really more inclusive. And we identified a couple of actors that are journalists, media outlet, media development organization, policymaker, and citizen. So all of these actors are really crucial and will make the difference for journalism to be more inclusive. We also included here this 6 steps approach that was developed by Sanne Bremer, who found or theorized this 6 steps approach in order to make journalism more inclusive. And these 6 steps are, first of all, to have a long-term strategy. Of course, inclusivity is something that it takes time, and it does not necessarily come immediately by hiring a diverse people with diverse backgrounds, but really inclusivity is something a bit more, it's different. And the only way to measure it is asking people how they feel. If they feel included, is not only numbers, how diversity can be measured more in that way. The second crucial step is becoming conscious of unconscious biases. Indeed, we all have biases, I think you all know that, but really becoming also aware of our own positionality and how this condition what we think, what we write, and what we choose to do. and really becoming aware also that often what we write or what we advise our other organization to do is not only objective, but rather is the result of subjective choices, and also challenge our own stereotypes that often we are unaware that we have them. But yeah, we should always try to make this effort in our daily lives. The third step is engagement with communities and audiences. Of course, if a journalist is reporting about events that happen in a community, it is necessary to ask this community how they see these events, how they contextualize them, and how they make sense of these events. And yeah, this is really important also to challenge our own biases. These steps, of course, should not be intended as separate, but they all inform each other. The fourth one is that inclusive journalism should enlighten and not only inform, in the sense that it should try not only to present problems or issues to our societies, but also to propose some solutions, so possible alternatives. Then to have a decolonial approach, meaning that, of course, history matters, and that some events maybe are reactions to other events, and some situations should never be seen in isolation from other historical processes such as colonialism, and really paying this attention on the colonial structure that still permeate our society today. And finally, to have a holistic approach, meaning that inclusive journalism should have put things in temporal context that is connected to this decolonial approach, but also in spatial context, and realize that everything is in a way connected, and then things don't happen in isolation, but from other events, but they really inform and happen one after the other for different reasons. We wanted here to present you very briefly also why we think, or what we found the relevance of inclusive journalism. We mainly identified 3 macro areas, but it's a very subjective subdivision of the relevance. The 3 micro areas we identified are civil societies, business consideration, and post-conflict areas. So inclusive journalism is relevant for civil society because it challenges dominant narratives and promotes cultural pluralism, but also the literature says that inclusive journalism has the potential to bridge the gap between discussion and change. So people tend to read the news and media, but often the content that they read is not really targeted to them, or it comes very quickly, news come very quickly. So there is always a gap between this reading of the news and discussing this news and then actual societal change. And yeah, the literature was emphasizing how through and thanks highly targeted audiences, inclusive journalism has the potential to bridge this gap. Secondly, we identified some benefits for business consideration, in the sense that inclusive journalism can increase revenues, and this is what several studies showed. However, and we really want to emphasize this point, profit should never be seen as a driver of inclusive journalism, but rather as a collateral effect of inclusivity, because literature shows that if profit is what drives inclusivity, for example, in an office, in an organization, it tends to result in segregated visibility rather than in real inclusivity. So people are hired, but they're not really included. And with inclusion, I mean that they don't feel included, or their opinion are not heard. So yes, profit should never be a real driver. And finally, the third macro area, of course, this should be understood as umbrellas. Many more relevant points are encompassed below these macro areas, is the importance for inclusive journalism in post-conflict areas. Indeed, inclusive journalism becomes a useful tool to rebuild divided societies. And in these cases, it's not only an ethical choice, but really an act of resistance against violence, because it can change the narratives and really try to heal the societal wound that happen after conflicts.
So now I'll briefly summarize some of the main points that we decided were the best practices of inclusive journalism through media content, the newsroom, and business considerations. So basically, for the media content, we say that having inclusive media content is the best way to give a voice to marginalized and normally non-included groups, so their identities will be recognized. Inclusive media content challenges dominant narratives through selecting and producing certain information, like that is product not of majority groups, or that are issues relevant to these majority groups, but rather includes information that's often neglected or from, minority groups. Also, inclusive media content takes a new approach on the use of language, for example, overcoming literacy obstacles such as using Braille or minority languages, and etc. Also, it confronts biases and assumptions, and it also confronts framing bias that tends to happen in dominant narratives in media. Also, building on what the conclusions from the breakout rooms was, inclusive media content is accessible to everybody. It allows everyone to access it and able to own some sort of way to information. Wait, is the next slide up?
Yeah.
Okay, it's glitching for me. Anyways, here we present in our resource guide, we have laid out a sort of language guide for including inclusive language regarding, here you can see ability and disability, age, gender and sexuality, nationality, and the list goes on, and you can see more of that in our resource guide that we have made. Okay, so also we identified that is important to practice inclusive journalism also in the newsroom. Especially diversity in the newsroom allows for this more fair representation of society, which goes in turn to contribute to inclusive journalism. Diversity in the newsroom means more inclusive content, and it can challenge these biases that are held on the ground. But it's important to note that hiring, as Aurelia said, hiring a diverse group is not enough. Also, biases and assumptions and power relations within organizations must change. So this concept of inconsistent inclusion must be avoided, because that means that marginalized groups tend to feel left out and sort of pushed at the edge of the organization, for example. So yeah, it's very important that in the newsroom also not to perpetuate these dominant narratives and to attend to the biases, and we develop upon this more in our resource guide.
Yeah, so some words on best practices of inclusive journalism regarding to a business perspective, because we have, especially in the interviews, encountered also that inclusivity has a certain business aspect, and that if an organization, for example, reinvents itself based on inclusivity, that it can also have an impact on the sustainability of this organization. So basically what we have found in our literature search and the interviews is that inclusivity as a business principle could, for example, ensure funding, which is of course also highly interesting for an organization such as FPU. But basically, since inclusivity and considerations in that direction have become sort of more popular also on the global stage, is sort of to go with the time and to be able to keep up with also other organizations. And in that regard, inclusivity and diversity can also result in higher revenues. So for example, if a more diverse newsroom is created, and if these people also feel included and are just not hired for having a token, so to say. Also, a much diverse range of stories can be covered, and much more diverse audiences can be addressed, which can result in higher revenues. And for example, if I know specifically who my audience is, then advertisements, for example, can be much better targeted. Of course, this depends very much on the business model and on the approach that a certain organization or an output takes, but it's something to consider. And also by targeting audiences much more closely and by speaking to them in sort of their language and their formats, this can have implications for long-term strategies, because if a reader feels, for example, very addressed, they are more likely to stick to a certain journalistic output or a company, which can lead to sustainability and ensuring that an organization can also operate on a long-term basis. And as we said, long-term strategies are quite important, because this cultural change of being inclusive or more inclusive is quite hard to achieve and quite slow. So it's definitely important to not only look at what's happening today and tomorrow, but to sort of take this approach into the future. But again, we would like to point out economic benefit should not be the driving force of inclusion. And I think Aurelia has explained that quite well already.
Yeah, so here we really sketched our research as much as we could and tried to summarize it very briefly. But if you're interested, we really encourage you to read our report. We really now presented a brief overview. And now we want to present a little guide on actually how to read our research guide. It's a bit long, but I hope this information we will provide you with will help you to read it and to keep working on it, because it's really just a starting point. Yona, yes. So we put at the appendix 1, I think, this overview of how we intended the guide. So, and also how maybe it's a suggestion, of course, how this could then be translated into a website format. So there's going to be these, firstly, this yellow box kind of, orange box, sorry. And from there, the people are going to be able to browse to the yellow boxes, and from then directly to the blue boxes. And it's also possible to pass from one yellow box to the other yellow box. Sorry if this is a bit confusing, but I think the graph speaks better itself. And this is mainly our main sections are these introduction, definition, relevance, what is the issue today. And then we also put at the end summary section where for each stakeholder, in the sense that every person can browse and according to their identity or how they identify. So if they identify as a journalist, they can immediately click there, and there's going to be the whole information summarized that is relevant for that particular actor and what is relevant for this actor to make more inclusive journalism.
Aside from this summary section, which we think is quite nice, we also have throughout the whole guide these gray learn more boxes, where you can see on the right, on the left, sorry. So for example, this learn more box is about Black Lives Matter and how Black Lives Matter relates to inclusivity. And you can, for example, see that we try to incorporate diverse perspectives on the same issue here, for example, by having sources from Pakistan, by having sources from Latin America, and just to provide a starting point for further research. Then throughout the whole guide, we have these yellow boxes in which you can find FPU partner projects. So basically, when there's a theoretical claim, if we were able to find a partner project for that theoretical claim that sort of illustrates what we were saying, then we have a box here. So in this example, it's, for example, Contra Corriente in Central America. And yeah, you can see just a very brief summary of what this partner does and how that relates to inclusive journalism. And we always also link the website. So this is also sort of a starting point for further independent research. And yeah, as we already said, we have these summary sections for each actor with points of reflection. And for example, here you can see the points for reflection when working in a media development organization. So here are just questions that you can ask yourself to reflect on your work. For example, in selecting photos and stories on diverse people and communities, are they depicted only in stereotypical situations? And just questions like that triggers sort of a reflection over your work processes and also of how you think about your work. And finally, we have this appendix that Aurelia also already mentioned, where we also described our methodology of creating this resource guide, because for us, this worked quite well. So we suggest that, or it could be an idea for future resource guide research to yeah, maybe adopt a similar approach. And you can also see the survey responses and the online structure and some points of inspiration for those who pick up the work, because we would like to emphasize again that this is a starting point, and we are very happy to have been able to provide what we believe insights into many different aspects. But of course, we were sort of timely restricted, and there's much more out there. So just a quick look at the table of contents as seen in the resource guide, and you can just browse through all the different pages and read through it. Okay, now we would like to go into more of a discussion format, follow-up activity. So we would love to hear your opinion. We have some questions prepared for you. I would suggest that we skip doing this and we go more into a discussion. But first of all, thank you for your attention until now. And yeah, do you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about our presentation now? And yeah, any feedback that would be interesting for us to know.
Yeah.
Yes, Maria, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm just interested, like, how inclusive was your process of writing this guide? Did you interview all the partners you mentioned? Did you ask them to critically review this, provide their own context-specific, country-specific, culture-specific references?
I mean, as I said before, we were a bit limited in time because this was a semester-long project, but it wasn't a full-time semester-long project. So we yeah, proceeded FPU internally, mostly with our interviews. And for the partner organizations, we consulted the websites and sort of the track record that FPU has on these projects. But yeah, the research can definitely be more inclusive, because it was quite hard for us to sort of also leave our standpoint and to go beyond what we think is important. So there's definitely a limitation of our guide. But as we also said, yeah, there's future work that needs to be done in this project. And we think that this is definitely one of the aspects that can be improved.
And just to understand, how did you decide not to include a single partner in the interview list? Just how did you take this decision within your team? Because you seem to bring a lot of information about how to be inclusive, and we really appreciate it. I appreciate it. But how did you take this inclusion, non-inclusion decision within your working group?
Maybe I can answer that.
It was clear that FPU partners should not be part of the process when we're describing them.
Maybe we want to respond to that, Maria, because they were not working in isolation, this team. And the idea was for FPU to understand, first of all, what that means for us, you know, and this is the first step that has been done so far. So the comments that we are getting now is actually the homework that the TTF and those who want to join this process, you know, is to take over and finalize. It's not something that will go in the way it looks now, this document, to the website. There will be some extra work. Yeah.
Thanks for clarification. I think I got an answer to my question. Thanks.
let me congratulate everyone who has worked on this project, because it seems extremely interesting and topical for an organization as FPU, and for the very interesting methodology that you described, providing a good mix of theory and applied research. I just have a quick question concerning some of the initial slides. For example, the 6-step approach, just for my understanding. Are those approaches an adaptation of the theories that you have found in literature, or is it something that you are replicating straight from what you have found, or does it come directly from your thoughts? This is my initial question. And then the second question that I have, probably Larissa answered to some extent, but just to rephrase it, is this guide to be seen as the final product or a work in progress in terms of reflection on what inclusive journalism could look like, should look like, and how could it evolve? And I'm asking this because I see inclusive journalism not as a fixed notion or theory or approach, but something that might evolve over time in the coming years as well. So is this, are we kicking a ball that will continue rolling in the future? Just to frame this,
just to summarize your question, so to put it in 2 parts as far as I understand. So the 6-step approach, how did you come up with that? Who is the source of that? And the second is that the final product, right?
Yeah, is the final product, or are we putting more thought around inclusive journalism? Are we ready to rephrase and reframe and think about inclusive journalism here on as an organization? And is this a milestone in further reflection around inclusive journalism?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe I can start to react your questions. Basically, what we have as a theoretical framework in our resource guide is not something that we just invented, but it's based on academic research. It's based on academic sources and on also news articles. And if you take a look into our resource guide, you will see that there's references for every claim that we make that sort of needs to be backed up. And yeah, so this 6 steps approach, it's not something that we have invented ourselves, but it's yeah, we found this approach and we integrated into yeah, sort of the theoretical framework that we have or that we found. And regarding your second question, maybe the answer can be shown by just, if I forward this PowerPoint a bit, you can see that we put here as a question, this resource guide is a starting point, and what should happen next? And how do you assess FPU's capacity and potential to become even more inclusive? So it's definitely a starting point, and we try to sort of get thoughts going also with this event today.
I would also like to add, we also develop upon the fact that it is a malleable topic and interpretable to every individual. And I think that's kind of goes along with what we're saying, how it is a starting point, it is a work in progress, and it isn't this concrete sort of prescription that should be taken, that shouldn't be questioned and shouldn't be reflected upon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the follow-up, I think, is twofold. First of all, just to keep the conversation, of course, going about it in the organization, which is one of the purposes also of this presentation, but more concretely, the thematic task force, as well as what we from Knowledge and Quality will use this as the this hard work from the students as the basis to sort of finish the resource guide onto the website, including also the points that that Maria raised, for instance. But of course, as it is the case, or should be the case with all our resource guides, once they're on the websites, they are not set in stone. So as long as we're working on this topic, it is the intention that the resource guide that we have reflects our latest insights on the topic. So that will also, when it is published, remain a work in progress. Just as what Davida said, the understanding and the best practices that simply exist out there with regards to inclusive journalism will hopefully continue to develop. So then we'll also try to continue to reflect that and keep the guide updated when necessary.
So first of all, my compliments to the team of the University of Maastricht, Jonas, Aurelia, and Sinead. I didn't read every page very detailed, but I went through the report and read certain bits and pieces, and I think it's very well done. You did quite an extensive piece of legwork, as they say, for us. So thank you for that. And it was quite interesting for me to read and see some of the projects that I worked on back in the report, of which I at the time might have been totally not conscious of the fact that it was inclusive, but good to know now. I might have missed certain parts of the presentation or in previous references on this particular session, because this is called the Reference Guide for Inclusive Journalism. Maria touched already upon an issue related to partners and involving partners. But since this is inclusive journalism, there's two things. Like we have this internal how do we call it today? Community of practice, thematic
task force on equity.
Yeah, thematic task force, which I thought was rebaptized from gender equality into what now? Diversity and inclusivity or something?
Equity, diversity.
Sorry, I can't remember. And then in the slide before this one with the questions and FPU and so there was something there which said like, does FPU have the capacity to become more inclusive? Which for me is a different level, right? It's like, this is a resource guide for the work that we do with the people that we do it with.
Yes, I was saying that for me, that I wanted to respond to Nada's comment because it's something I particularly also think a lot about it. Is it enough to think about inclusion on our work? But I do think, as I think Aurelia said before, that it's not only important that we have it, we think about it while working, but we also have to understand our positionality. If we are not diverse in our organization, if we are not inclusive, I find it very hard that our work will end up being inclusive, because we have
exactly
we only come from one point of view or from one direction. So I do think that these are parallel and complementary tracks. And in FPU at the moment, as you rightly said, there is a task force, but there is also a working group working on how to make FPU more inclusive. So that the two things work hand in hand to be able to really become more inclusive in our work, but also in our structure.
So yeah, to match these 2 points of importance to be inclusive for the outside, but also start from ourselves. Like we don't want to have tokenism. We have to really work hard. And indeed, there are initiatives ongoing, but we are not yet there. So we have to acknowledge that. So we cannot preach what we don't have yet ourselves. So hopefully we can do that. When it comes to your note that we should include partners in deciding our strategic direction, of course, but we first have to reflect, like, what are we, what can we offer, where do we want to go to, and indeed double check if this is also the direction our partners want to go to,
but
and adapt.
I mean, and I don't necessarily agree with that volgorde, but sometimes you can only also find your direction by listening to partners rather than first figure it out yourself and then asking them, what do you think? Which is kind of the practice here for years now. We figure out the strategy, we make something that's pretty much set in stone, and then we ask them what they think, rather than ask them like open, without feeding them whatever information. is what they truly think. For me, that's inclusivity, having partners directly participate without being sort of guided towards the direction that we want them to go. I'm not sure if I'm being clear in what I mean, but I would really want to see a change in that. Otherwise, like Paloma said, I kind of have, and maybe we should look also at the language or how we present such resource guides, because if we're preaching something that we do not practice really ourselves, I kind of have a problem with it.
I think we all acknowledge that it's not the end product yet. We have a lot of actions to initiate also within FPU. And Jonas, did you want to explore that a bit more? We are now out of it's now 2:30. Those who can stay, can we stay 5 more minutes, or do you?
Yeah, I think yeah, for us it's fine. We have some discussion questions prepared, and I don't think we necessarily need to discuss all of them now. But we just thought that these might be interesting also starting points to reflect on FPU and the work with the partners. And I think already the discussion that you were having right now about the relation to partners and FPU was really interesting, and can already, yeah, that already indicates that there's more to research on this and more to think about it. But yeah, we just had these few questions that might be the basis for discussing topics like this even more. And I'm not sure now how we want to go about these, whether we want to pick one or whether we want to have a more general discussion, but we can stay for a few more minutes, yeah.
Does anybody have an initial response to what we, to any of these questions? We'll have to keep the last discussion short, of course, but I think we can have 1 or 2 responses.
Yeah, I just can add, following on Nada and Amy. I do believe that in the designing our long-term projects and interventions and programs, it should be partner-led where possible and if possible, because this is the real bottom-up approach we have, and also in our assessment of risks, assessment of safety procedures for the organization. I think this is where we definitely need to understand, but of course we need to understand our partners ourselves. Themselves are not a uniform group. They represent different culture, different education, different backgrounds. Everything is different, basically, about our partners. So I'm a bit worried that if we really make it a super inclusive process, especially with the level of knowledge that partners have about FPU, some of them only cooperate with us a bit, our strategy that is partner-led will also become like a Russian salad where you put all the ingredients, but really kind of that you have in the fridge, but you have like 10 fridges, right, with different food. So I would say I want to guide us to not be like, to think where we are as an NGO and where we are as a project. That's all.
Thanks for that input. Yeah, I think that's a really important element to keep in mind. Of course, that even when we are even when we are sort of trying to make the process more inclusive and make use or take into account the variety of perspectives that and experiences that our partners have, that we ultimately need to serve, that this needs to be a process that's structured in such a way that we still remain sort of one independent organization that, you know, serves our partners and their context, but is also still its own independent organization.
Maybe there's one question that we still want to discuss. When sharing this invitation, I also attached the report itself, so maybe some of you had some time to go through it. Were there anything that you particularly liked or missed?
Otherwise, I think it's also just good for us to sort of work on promoting the dissemination of this report and its content, as well as continuing with the task force to develop further our knowledge and approach on this topic, and to, of course, publish it and make it widely available, but also continue to add more elements to it.
yeah, I think everything that's obliged, it's if there's no intrinsic motivation, it will also not lead to anything, or it will lead to something, but not to what you probably expect. I would like to thank all of the students who have worked hard to make this first discussion possible. And we wish you a lot of luck with the rest of your studies. And we will be in touch for one more thing we want to check with you. And thanks a lot also to our colleagues who have prioritized this meeting over tens of other meetings they have to choose from, and for your input. And we will definitely come back to you with asking for more. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
And
Thank you, guys.
for again
Bye.
being available also
Bye.
for doing this presentation on top
No,
of
for
you
sure.
during the
Bye.
semester.